Malvern Books. I'm Becky Garcia. I'm the manager here, and we're so thrilled to have you at our August novel night. And we do this every month, the second Thursday of the month. We like to feature two local area authors to talk to us, to read to us, and then we also have a book talk, and we have a kind of a Q&A session after each of the readings, which is always fun. Another part of tonight is that all our fiction for the duration of the evening is 20% off. So that's a nice little perk for coming to Novel Night. And of course, we have some great snacks, so we'd like you to take advantage of those too. So first up, we start out with a book talk from one of our Malvern staff members. And tonight we have Kelsey, and she'll be doing a book talk for you here tonight.
Thanks for hanging in with me here. So, I have like all my notes like on these pieces of paper, and I'm hoping that it is an homage to the style of the book, which I'll get into. So this is the book here. It's called 3 by Anne Quinn. And I picked it because it was a bit smaller, but it's actually pretty hard to read, which is not a bad thing. So I'll start off with a little bit of biographical information. So Anne Quinn was born in the UK in 1936 and died by drowning at the age of 37. She is pretty much unknown in the United States. But at the time, in the 60s, in the UK, she was kind of one of the leading innovators of the British novel. She was a big deal, and so thank goodness for Delphi Archive for doing us the good favor of bringing her stuff back to us so that we can learn about her, and I can talk to you guys about her, because she is really cool. So her novels are kind of an example of what the British novel would have been had innovation been more kind of accepted, especially with a woman writer. So I would definitely highly suggest it just for that reason. She was really heavily influenced by her Catholic schooling as well as her love for theater. And I think that both of those are explored pretty well here in the novel as well. So this book is performed by 3 characters: Leonard, Ruth, a middle-class British couple, and their house guest, S, just S. S, at the beginning of the book, has disappeared suddenly, and Leonard and Ruth are trying to figure out and suss out through her diary entries, some film, whether or not that her disappearance was a suicide. So that is kind of what drives the narrative of the novel. So the narrative is kind of the most crucial part of the book, but I think that the most interesting part is the style. So it's kind of a mosaic of a lot of different things. It's not going to be, here's what happened, and then here's what happened next. It kind of reads like a poem. It reads like a text that's plot-driven. It has text from diaries and films and kind of other like ethereal sources. And Quinn played really widely in those kind of other spaces, which I think is really interesting. So I thought I would read a few passages that kind of tell you a little bit what I mean by that. So this first one, I think, is an example of both the ethereal quality of some of the prose in this, and then also kind of the engagement that Quinn kind of forces you into in order to kind of get this full picture. So I will begin with that. A plan devised for their amusement with masks. Situation insoluble. 3 points A, B, and C on a rigid body in a straight line. When the points A and C being given B is chosen such that the sum of distances AB and BC is as short as possible. Suggestion A walks past B and C. A might turn, stop tread, walk on, B and C watch, perhaps follow A, or separate, possibly disappear together, variations endless, grimaces behind expressionless faces, gestures, attempt communication, worms cut in half, he galatin, she stalks, stiff, thrusting the air around, sound of her bracelets only. He follows confronted by slits for eyes, dismay, absorbed, interpreters in isolation, chameleons in company, shapes construct their own fancies. So that's kind of like from more of an ethereal source. Don't really know who's talking, but it makes sense anyway when you put it together, and it's really beautiful. This one is a diary entry that I thought was pretty interesting, so I'm going to read from that. Friday. My hands, instruments of torture. Hers, butterflies. When excited, flustered. His feet, the goldfish. Fingers snap like crickets in long grass as he enters, leaves a room. His face in the car mirror. Panic. The speedometer jerks up, back up again, further round. A feeler once an appetizing victim found. Hovers and pulls quickly to the nest. So that's in the same novel. And kind of makes a lot more sense when you put it together, but I thought those two passages were really beautiful. So I love the style that this book is written in. It's very careful and it's very courageous with the rhythm. There's no quotation marks. There's no distinctions between descriptions and dialogue and characters. So like I mentioned, it kind of like Anne Quinn kind of just like demands of you to be present and engage with the text, which is really great. And anything less than that, total engagement, you're out. Like, you're not in this anymore. Get off the ride. So I think that for fans of Virginia Woolf, this would be a wonderful novel. Anybody who's a total nerd and loves to dissect and be obsessed about a book would recommend anything she's written. And it's short, but like I said, you know, it takes a second or third reading, which is really fun. So I would highly recommend you pick up Read by Anne Quinn. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kelsey. All right, so our first reader tonight is A.R. Russell Ashworth. He earned a degree in history and worked for over 20 years in high tech. Along the way, he developed a lasting love for London, dark British-style mysteries, and Scandinavian noir. Souls of Men is the first novel of the Elaine Hope series, was released in April 2017. The sequel, Folded Lies, will be published in spring 2018. Ashworth and his wife live in the Texas Hill Country with an oversized tabby cat and a neurotic Chihuahua.
Thanks, Becky. And thanks to Malvern Books for having us here tonight. This is really great. Pardon me. I'll get it under control here. I don't have a book up here because I would have real trouble reading if it isn't 16-point double-spaced. So I did print out part of the book. The novel Souls of Men is like Becky might have been said, it's a dark British-style mystery. One of the reviewers said it starts out as a procedural but takes a really strange turn towards the end, which it does. That was intentional because my character Elaine Hope is someone that I really fell for once I was into the book. Someone told me very early on, you need to mistreat your characters, so I did. I'm heavily into the sequel right now. It's not nearly as dark as the first one. But what I'm going to do is instead of reading one passage, I'm going to read sort of several short passages that I think will give everyone here an idea of who Elaine is. This first passage starts out in early days. In fact, a teenage girl's been murdered. Elaine's team is on the job. And they have a prime suspect that they've arrived at from various ways. And it's not that one, no. So they're about to go interview him. She and her boss are about to go interview the prime suspect. Elaine was burrowed deep in the warmth of her duvet when her mobile rattled. Without peeking, she extended her arm and patted for the phone on the cluttered nightstand, toppling a cup and sending a rivulet of thick, cold cocoa streaming across the cover of her current novel. Crap. She blinked and squinted at the phone. Crap again at 7 bleeding a.m. on Sunday morning. Couldn't they have waited another hour? She listened to the duty sergeant's voice with her eyes closed, mumbling responses. Yes. Does Benford know? Uh-huh. Text me the address. Yeah, text me, Sergeant, because no, I do not have a pen handy. Yes, I'll collect Benford once he's ready. She groaned silently to herself as she ended the call. Testy bastard. She looked down at Scratch, the cat who was draped over her leg and staring at her with typical feline annoyance. No need to stare at me like that, boyo. I can't help phone calls. And have I ever not fed you? She lay back on the pillow, staring at the ceiling, willing her eyes open and her mind awake. At least Scratch's displeasure was easier to deal with than a man's would have been. Not that she'd had to think about that for some time. It would be 2 years, give or take a week, at 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning, when Alan number 2 had appeared at her door drunk, wounded, and blustering because she hadn't been home for 36 hours. Before they got together, she'd warned him about her job's intrusive, unreasonable demands. She'd related how exhaustion and constant stress triggered emotional outbursts or drove her to seek catharsis through frantic sex. One way or the other, she exhausted herself. Telling Alan number 2 about the realities of her life hadn't made any more difference to him than it had to Alan number 1. She'd given each a Hobson's choice. Endure the solitude and her emotional fluctuations, or there's no hope, lads. They'd like the sex part at first before they realized that despite her attentions in the bedroom, her priorities lay elsewhere. She'd not kicked either of them out. Each had eventually chosen to leave her. She laughed to herself. They wouldn't stay even for the sex. She wasn't that good at it. Most likely there would be another man in her life someday. There hadn't been many men over the years. Her trail of broken hearts wasn't long. She was open to romance. She wanted warmth and compassion, companionship. But next time, she also wanted something that would last. How many men in this world wanted to spend their lives with a gangly, 6-foot-tall female detective? Not bloody many. Enough of the daydream. Elaine shifted her leg to dislodge Scratch, rolled out of bed, and slouched to the bathroom. Her morning routine didn't take long. She slid through a quick shower and into some jeans, a heavy shirt, and a woolly jersey. Ran a comb through her thick chocolate brown hair and considered applying some makeup. No, it's a murder investigation. Maybe there'd be time for that later, and perhaps not. She didn't care if anyone she met today minded whether she had on makeup. They could take it or leave it. Once in the kitchen, she dolloped some food into Scratch's bowl and topped up his water. A glance at the clock told her she was running a bit late, but Benford hadn't called yet, so she dropped 2 slices of bread into the toaster, filled the electric kettle, and spooned instant coffee into a large travel mug. She was halfway through a second piece of buttered toast when her mobile rattled, and the reggae lilt of Jimmy Cliff's The Harder They Come told her Benford was finally texting his usual one-word message. Ready. The little joke there is, of course, Benford is Jamaican. She refilled her coffee mug and grabbed her worn gray and black donkey jacket as she headed out the door. It may have been shapeless and ugly, but it was warm and waterproof. People could take or leave the donkey jacket along with the makeup. On her way down the stairs, she patted each of the jacket's capacious zip pockets. Her notebook and 2 pens were in their usual places in the left pocket. In the right pocket, she felt the rectangle of her wallet and the flat square of her warrant card. The old coat could carry everything she needed to meet a murderer. Okay. The second little passage is also about Elaine. Deals a little bit more with some of her motivations, I think, towards the end of it. And she's at the end of a really hard day, and her routine then is to take a very hot shower. Elaine twisted the valve as far as it would go and levered it fully open. Hot water was what she needed, and lots of it, as she did many nights during an investigation. She tilted her head back and let it filter through her hair, trickle down her spine, cascade over her breasts, flow over her belly, and with a gurgle disappear down the drain. She hoped that each rivulet that wound its way over her torso somehow neutralized a sin she had come in contact with that day. Perhaps in doing so, it would wash away the one she carried with her. She was unsure if it worked, however long she rinsed. This was because the next morning she would rise, wash away the sleep, and begin her daily process of gathering to herself the knowledge of murder. Sometimes the task seemed as futile as her nightly shower, but she had to do it. In a back corner of her psyche, Elaine was still 7 years old, still curled on the sitting room floor, bewildered and frozen with fright, and Moira was still in the bedroom, screaming her last breaths through the thin wall of the council flat. At some point, of course, as in every investigation, every fictional one anyway, the case is in tatters. She has a new prime suspect, but really the evidence is tenuous and it depends mainly on circumstance and her hunches. So she's sitting in her office, looking into the incident room, thinking about it. They didn't have much. Any defense lawyer would chalk it all up to coincidence. Coincidences, she hated them. They really did not exist, at least not in the realm of criminal investigation. By the time an investigation was underway, there was usually a glimmer of connection. What decisions did the victim make? What decisions did the killer make? What is coincidence but the result of decisions taken by people who share some subtle nexus, some obscure impetus that at some point begins to forge a chain of events? A chain held at one end by the murderer's hand and at the other by the hand of the victim. Sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly, each party grasped the next link in the chain, driven by some personal need. With each decision, they made the chain shorter. Possibility crept toward probability. Whatever they wanted, whatever that desire was, they grew closer, until they reached a point at which only one link separated them. At that crux, a single decision either averted tragedy or made it inevitable. Causality must exist, otherwise there would be no action. So Elaine gave short shrift to coincidence. But jurors could believe in coincidence, and that belief spawned reasonable doubt in their minds, and reasonable doubt led to acquittal. She pictured the courtroom in her mind, the defense barrister, his ill-fitting wig perched on a head filled with visions of silk, looked at each juror in turn as he succinctly pointed out that murders always occur near some property or other. Did that mean the owners of the property were automatically involved in the crime? No. And what about the defendant? She pictured R, and I'm calling the defendant R right here, the suspect R. That's what that comes from. Looking as benign as he could, while his barrister pointed out that yes, he goes to dance clubs and raves. So do many young men in London. Young women go as well. The clubs are always crowded. Or we suspect every young person who likes to dance? I hope wherever you were was lovely. Paula stood at the office door smiling. Elaine shook her head to remove the thoughts from her mind. I was strolling through the scrapyard of coincidence. It wasn't a pleasant place. Are we out of time? We're good? Okay. This next scene is from the end. This was suggested by my wife. Bless her heart. I love it. So I'm glad she suggested it. In this scene, Elaine intends to meet two other detectives at a brothel where they hope to catch R, who, that's the name I'm using for the prime suspect, just so that there's no spoilers involved. Now, one note. In it, I mentioned what an asp. An asp is a collapsible metal baton that police use. It's about that long, but when they flick it, it can come out to about that long. It is a fearsome weapon if the person knows how to use it. British police detectives do not carry guns. In fact, only a few British police officers do. That's a whole other topic. So, but if they're in this kind of situation, they do carry an asp. Elaine sat in her car and assessed the situation. She'd dialed 999 on her way, but the dispatcher told her that a gang fight had erupted, shots had been fired, and every armed response vehicle and authorized firearms officer in the district was busy. They would route the next closest ARV to her location, but it wouldn't arrive for at least 20 minutes. From the rather see what was around her and be able to move than be ambushed in the car. There was no point taking chances. She got out, found a deep shadow against a wall, and pushed the speed dial for Liz. She let the phone ring until it went on to voicemail. It's Elaine, call me. Maybe Liz was on the call. She dialed Bull. These are the two detectives. His phone went to voicemail immediately, as if it were turned off. That was odd. Met detectives did not turn off their mobiles. Had Liz and Bull already arrived? If they had, one of them would have remained outside to wait for her unless something had happened inside the house. This wasn't good. Our Maeve returned early. As she slid into a shadow closer to the house, she heard a high-pitched noise like the cry of a bird. She heard it again, only this time louder. It was a woman's scream. That could be Liz. Damn. Elaine pressed 999 and identified herself as she moved to the brothel. I'm entering a house to investigate two female screams. I suspect an officer's been attacked. She gave the address. Back up immediately, anyone you can send. She put her mobile in her pocket, flicked her asp to its full length, and pushed open the front door. She darted inside and pressed herself to the wall. She waited a moment, listening, picturing the interior from her previous visit. Stairs straight ahead, up one flight to a landing, then a second flight to the upper floor. Sitting room door 3 steps on the left, kitchen door 2 steps after. Check the sitting room first and remember the layout. Sofa against the back wall, 2 wooden chairs, probably scattered magazines and newspapers, so take care with the footing. By now her eyes had adjusted to the even dimmer light in the house. She moved slowly forward along the wall to her left, asp in ready position, until she was nearly at the sitting room door. Police, Bull, Liz. Scuffling sounds and a muted woman's cry came from the sitting room. Had Liz come here alone? R, let her go and come out unarmed. Backup's on the way. You don't have a chance. No response. She waited. But the only reply was the same muted sounds. She knew he was probably armed and there was no choice now. Elaine took a quick glance around the doorpost. A dim figure stood against the back wall. She moved to the door and through it. Yes, a woman was standing there, but the room was too dim for any detail. R's voice came from the darkness. Stupid cow, I knew you'd come. Is that it?
So, do we have any questions for Russell? You can't ask him who did it.
What is your love for the British? What made you go that direction rather than Mexico?
Oh, well, I started reading British mysteries. I tired quickly of Agatha Christie, but I happened to pick up Dorothy Sayers. And that changed my view of it. In fact, I think Gaudy Night's probably one of the best books I've ever read, bar none. Hers. So, British mysteries tend to be more character-driven than event-driven. You know, so that's why I fell in love with them and I decided to do that. Yeah. Yes.
How long did it take you to fully develop your character of Elaine?
Wow. Okay. So when I started writing the book, she was not the protagonist. A guy named Peter was the protagonist. He was an American surgeon living in London. And you know, I got pretty far into it. Well, pretty far, maybe 110, 120 pages. And the way I tell it is Elaine leaned over my desk and said, "He's not the protagonist. I am." And she was right. She was a far more interesting character. You know, they both have some issues, but she's the one who had legs, as they say. You know, she's the one I could write a series around. And yeah, she grew as I wrote. You know, and now I'm in the second book, and she's dealing with a whole different set of issues, and I'm even getting more into that character. Anything else? Thank you. Thanks for
Thank you, Russell. That was great. So our next reader is Evelyn M. Turner. Evelyn finished college in Pennsylvania and from there began working as a flight attendant, a job she held for over 35 years. Her work-related travel proved invaluable in her research for The Star and the Cross. Initially, she wrote a children's book, Shelley's Quest, but then decided to go ahead and finish and publish her novel. She hopes to continue the Star and the Cross series and write many more novels in the years to come. She also lives in the hill country with her horses, dogs, and cats. You're welcome.
Hey all, I started this book actually in 1989 and put it away, and then my husband found it in a box. And he said, "What are you doing with this book?" And I said, "Oh, I wrote it as a catharsis." So it's actually fiction based on a true story. And it's about my mother, one of Germany's prima ballerinas. And she danced in front of Hitler, Himmler, Eichmann, and her family was extreme Catholic and very loyal to their Bible. And they said, "Nope, we're not going to tolerate what's going on." So that's how I started it. Start the first page actually with her brother, who's a Catholic priest. And the book is filled with the emotional problems that develop when you fight for the right thing to do. And my grandmother used to say it was a time of silence. And it was because everyone was silent, no one spoke up. Except for this family. They did speak up in a way that no one else tried to. But this Catholic priest said, "No, not going to do it. We're going to fight against what's wrong." So I start the book. I'm going to read from different little chapters. There's my mother, her brother, the Catholic priest, and she has other brothers, 3 other brothers in the story. But we start out with Father Anthony von Rommel, and she's a Rommel. I don't know if any of you heard of General Rommel from World War II, but that's my grandfather's second cousin. So they're Rommels. So Father Anthony von Rommel glided cautiously but quickly through the streets and alleys in Berlin, his friend Simon Miller at his side. If they were stopped, it would be difficult to explain where they had been, but they needed desperately to get to the relative safety of their homes. They were almost to Simon's as they were approached the end of the alley that led to the Lutheran church he pastored. Simon surged ahead. Only last week, Anthony had helped Simon with repairs around his bomb-damaged building. But clearly, the rebuilding would have to wait till the end of the war, which they hoped would be soon. A sleek black car seemed to roar out of nowhere. It screeched to a halt, and 2 SS officers sprang out and demanded to see Simon's papers. It would only make matters worse if the SS men knew there were 2 of them. So Anthony held his breath. They pressed into the wall, his heart pounding in the shadows. "Gentlemen, I'm searching for my dog," Simon said cautiously as he offered his papers. "He ran off during the last air raid, and I'm afraid he will not be able to find his way home." "What do you do?" old man demanded. Sorry, I can't read without glasses, I've decided. One officer. "I'm a Lutheran minister," Simon answered. He gestured to the building with a hole in the wall. "This is my church, and I live in the back." Whether the answer satisfied was irrelevant. One of the Nazis struck Simon in the stomach. As Simon stumbled to his knees, the other officer thrust his papers in his face. "You may go," the officer barked. At the wall, Anthony dared to let out his breath. Simon was not badly hurt. He was already on his feet again, and in a few seconds the men would be gone. "Halt!" Without warning, one of the officers brandished his weapon. He fired as Anthony watched in horror. Simon whimpered, grabbing his gun. "Maybe next time he will remember to Heil Hitler," one agent joked. What does it matter?" the other responded. "These ministers and priests fight Hitler every inch of the way. We don't need them." The agents climbed into the car, and the driver backed it up toward Simon, who was barely still alive. Clearly, they intended to run over him. Anthony leaped into the street and rushed towards his friend. His hand gripped a weapon of his own. When he fired, his first shot was surprisingly on target, considering his lack of practice in the last few years. He'd given up all weapons when he decided on the priesthood, but during his childhood he had gone hunting with his father and brothers. Now, those earlier times stood him in good stead. Blood from one of the agents instantly splattered the window. Anthony fired and his gun was empty, and the second agent's mouth twisted in pain. The car went out of control, crashed, and exploded. This was not Anthony's concern, Simon was. He heaved his friend over his shoulder and stumbled down the street towards Simon's home. Blood flowed freely. By the time Anthony had Simon down inside the safety of the walls, there was not much to be done. Simon reached for Anthony's frantic hand and struggled to speak. Too late, he whispered. You have to understand the reason the priest is so important is because he doesn't give last rites. He turns around and walks away, but it's for the good of people. It's for good of saving 20 children when he has to kill 2 Nazis. So it's a decision that a priest it was very hard for him to make through this whole book, to actually in some ways go against his faith, but never lose his faith. And then the next few chapters later, it deals with Katharina, his sister, who he involves in the resistance. And let me find where I can start here. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Everyone lived in fear of document inspections, and new Gestapo agents could confiscate papers at any time. And without the proper papers, and individuals had not even the weakest line of defense should they be confronted by the authorities. Rarely was anyone who disappeared ever seen again. They had tried to intimidate Anthony once by picking him up to interrogate along with many other Germans. Their ages from 5 to 100 for no reason, just because they could. Another time they had briefly questioned all the brothers, Anthony, Heinz, Hans, and Edwin, but they had remained faithful to both family and country, though not to the Nazi system. As a priest, Anthony could still travel at night despite the curfew. He frequently moved through the city to a convent garden where he found instructions left by persons unknown hidden behind a brick. While he never knew who sent the instructions, they knew him, and they knew the code words Anthony and Peter had established. And then there was Katharina. Anthony constantly feared for her safety. Only a handful of people knew that the ballet company was hiding people trying to escape Germany. With Edwin's help, Anthony provided them with paperwork, and the company provided them with a cover as workers supporting the company as it traveled. They were always asked to perform for the generals and the upper echelon of places they invaded. When the company came closer to the borders of Norway, Denmark, or Switzerland, certain individuals simply slipped away and disappeared. Okay. Then my mother goes and dances, and this is her first time that she takes pictures. And she has since become involved with this Nazi Gestapo agent, and this is where he starts to question. "Excuse me, Frederick," she said. "I need to use the ladies' room. I'll be right back." Her legs felt like rubber as she rose, determined to concentrate on the mission. She found the room easily and was thankful to see a bathroom on the same floor. If anyone caught her, she would explain she was looking for the bathroom. With a prayerful breath, she slowly opened the door. Her eyes soon adjusted to the darkness, lightened only by the glow of the full moon through the window. "Oh, please let me find the file." It seemed like hours before she spotted the file cabinet in the far corner. The moon gave out enough light, and she soon found the papers to photograph. She lined them up on the floor and began to snap pictures. By the time she finished, sweat rolled down her back. She was closing the file cabinet, having replaced the files, when her eye caught a folder marked camps. When she opened the file for a quick peek, she nearly gagged at the pictures. Quickly, she took more photographs. Her stomach heaving, she cautiously opened the door to leave. By now, she really did need to find a bathroom. The contents of the last file had made her extremely nauseated. She barely made it to the two doors down to the bathroom before she became suddenly ill. When she finally stopped throwing up, she rinsed out her mouth, adjusted her dress, and opened the door to the hallway. When she heard her name called, she jerked around and went pale as a ghost. "What has taken you so long, Katharina, and why come to this floor for a bathroom?" Frederick wanted answers. Before she could answer, bile again rose to her throat. She motioned to Frederick. She was returning to the bathroom and certain that he would be able to hear the sounds of her vomiting through the door. When she finally emerged looking even more pale, she responded to the question still on his face. I wanted privacy. I did not care to have everyone hear me sick in the other lavatory. I'm sorry if you were concerned. Frederick wiped the beads of sweat from her forehead. Mein Liebchen, I did not realize you were so sick. Let me see that you were taken home. You do not need to stay. So that was her first introduction to spying. So then she has another brother, and he was married to a Jewish girl. And Frederick Spitz, who my mother eventually married, he took her first and had her sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp. And Edwin and Rita had been in love since they were about 5 years old. So theirs was a love story in itself. So in the morning, so after he found out she had been taken, they decided he's going to rescue or find her. In the morning, dressed in uniforms and looking like the SS Hauptführer and his driver to routine duty, Edwin and Dietrich entered the compound. With the stomach in his throat, Edwin and Dietrich with the correct procedure for his assumed role after all, and entered the main building on his own. Edwin focused on keeping his hand from shaking and prayed his voice would sound smooth. Nearly 2 hours later, he returned to the car. Dietrich jumped and performed his duty, opening the rear door for his officer. You were gone a long time, Dietrich muttered as he returned to his position behind the wheel. The commander wanted to tell me about how well they run the camp and the benefits of working here. They share the women, then kill them when the new group comes in. May they all rot in hell. Did you find anything out about Rita? The commander showed me his records freely. I believe I know where she is. And then when he finds her, he goes, when he sees her for the first time, he goes, every inch of her small frame seemed to be bruised and her beautiful hair was gone. Edwin couldn't miss the distinctive blue eyes, even now standing out against her sickly pale face. Her feet were swollen and it was clear that at least one toe was broken. How could they have done so much damage to her in such a week? Dietrich lurched to grab Edwin as he climbed out of the car, but he was too late. All of Edwin's good sense left him at the sight of his wife. He sprang from the car and began to close the distance between him and Rita. In response, Rita limped towards them. A guard shouted for Rita to stop, but she didn't. Edwin was already pulling out his weapon, as was Dietrich. Shouts rang out just as Edwin's fingers touched Rita's through the fence. They spoke simultaneously, I love you. Then Edwin went down. On the other side of the fence, Rita collapsed. Their blood mingled in the dirt. So. And then at the end of the war, the family goes towards post-war Berlin, and they become involved in fighting the Russians. So this family never gives up. They were very righteous people. So this is towards at the end, when they're in at 1946, 47, 48. Katharina watched helplessly as her father Hans tried to keep their factories open and productive. It was the hunger and cold of winter that Katharina desperately wanted to escape. Not a day went by that she did not formulate a plan to leave Berlin. She wanted food, she wanted warmth, she wanted to have enough of anything, of everything. She wanted to forget and convince the life in Berlin would take far too long to return to her pre-war qualities. She just wanted out of the struggle. Other than when she danced, escaping the impoverished city was on her mind every waking moment. Through her dancing, Katharina was slowly learning to put her reason before temper. She had lived on the edge of her rolling emotions, so this didn't always come easy. Often they experienced such melancholy that her whole body ached, and this presented itself as chronic ill temper. Her family's pity only made things worse. No one could begin to grasp what she had been through in the concentration camps the last months of the war. She didn't even remember herself, so how could they pretend to understand? The evenings haunted her. Darkness was the enemy. that the habit of nightmares posed to lunge her into a moment and not guard her at all. She constantly believed someone was watching her. Occasionally, she even asked her mother to look out the window to see the person who must be there, but was time to heal. Numbing her senses with quantities of wine or brandy soon became a nightly routine for Katerina, and the family complied by somehow managing to keep enough on hand to sedate her. When Katerina fleetingly wondered what sacrifices they were making to do so, she dismissed the thought even before she could take full form. She had promised Anthony she would make an effort with Alexandria. Alexandria was the child that she had in the concentration camp, which her first husband turned her in, which is in the middle of the book. So he turned her in when she was 8 months pregnant, and she gave birth in the camp. So that's why she's having these nightmares, and she just can't get over them. So the book goes into, actually towards the end, towards where she finds a way out of Germany, and subsequently it's her struggle ends up being all her life. I don't really know my mother because she left when I was 8 years old. So so there's going to be a second story because there's a gentleman in this book who is part of the, actually became part of the Mossad, that they worked in when the Berlin Wall went up. They continued their journey into taking documents in and out. So I hope you enjoy the book. If you do, read it. And I know I need glasses.
Are there any questions for Evelyn?
I have one, and it's very poignant. I enjoy reading it. It's really a hard book in so many ways. But you spoke at the very first about research and everything. Just wonder if you speak to that a little bit more. Did you?
Well, I heard my grandmother told me stories. My Uncle Dietrich, who was in the book, really witnessed Edwin being shot in Ravensbrück. All these little, you can't keep secrets in families, they leak out. And I always kept this journal from the time I was 8 years old. When I would hear stories, I would jot them down. I questioned why I wasn't living with my sister, who was still in Berlin. She was my half-sister. And my grandmother was very forthright. She explained she was born in a concentration camp. And her father was who turned my half-sisters in. So my grandparents were very knowledgeable in explaining everything to me, but then I started doing research with the German government and went in and found prison records, concentration records. I found arrest records for Anthony when they kept questioning him. I found her other two brothers, they murdered them also because they wouldn't give up their family, and that was all recorded also in documents. The Germans, they wrote down everything. So it's that's how I did the research. Yeah. And we have all the ballet pictures. We have newspaper articles. That was the other thing. So the ballet pictures are all out there. The newspaper articles are out there. She ended up in Hawaii, and there's articles on her dancing for Harry Owen's orchestra at the Royal Hawaiian. So we have pictures of that too. So
There's another question?
What was the reaction of your family to you putting all this on paper?
some of them weren't happy. That's why when we published the book, we actually had to have the legal department said we had to change some names because there's some that said we don't want our name put in there. Even my half-sister is as close as we are. She said, oh, please don't put my name in there. So we name her as Alexandria, but she said, I just don't want anybody to question me. I don't want them to ask me who my father was, why he did that to us. So that's because she never met him. So that's there was quite a few people that asked me to no names, please. So, but
Anything else?
okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, so that concludes our readings for tonight. Thank you again for coming out. We really appreciate it. Evelyn and Russell will be at the table signing books. If you'd like to get one of their books, they would love for you to, I'm sure, as would we. Take your time, browse around, eat some more snacks, and we hope to see you again in Malvern Books. Thank you.
Nice to see you, yeah.
Yeah, I'll let the staff know.
Oh, okay.